And welcome to All People's Church Unitarian Universalist. My name is Mary Kerwin, and I'm here to help lead worship and with our guest speaker, Reverend Mark Christian. Our Sunday service is a shared time of worship for all present as we gather for music, spoken words, a time of reflection and inspiration as a religious community. Let us come together in a spirit of compassion and respect for ourselves and others that are attending this service. We especially welcome those who are visiting today. If you haven't yet done so, please sign in by the table located by the front door, where you can be placed on our mailing list to receive our weekly email and our monthly newsletter. Before we continue on to for Eastside Ministries, and next Saturday, February 18th, Eastside is sponsoring a health outreach event on the south side of Fort Worth. This is part of a large grant that Eastside has received, and we'll be doing it once a month. If you would like to volunteer to guide participants through the sign-up and the health screenings and give out food and clothing donations, please see Virginia. And Virginia's right here. Again, this event is next Saturday, February 18th from 9 until 3 at the Crossroads Community Center on Hemp Hill. And I've done that before, and it's a good time, so. Also, plan now to attend the Southwest UU Women's Conference. Their theme is Phoenix Rising, and it will be the weekend of March 3rd through the 5th in 3 weeks at the First Unitarian Church in Dallas. Early bird registration is still available at the rate of $160 for the entire conference. That early bird rate is available until February 17th, so sign up now. Scholarships are available. And the Maiden program is returning, so there are also special rates for girls and their mothers, the girls ages 12 through 17. And we have one more announcement that Roz Hunter would like to tell us about.
Hello, I'm Rosalind Hunter. I'm secretary of the board. It's time for us to update our directory information. I mean, you wrote it a long time ago, but lots of things have changed. You might have moved, you might have changed your phone. So we're going to be passing these out. Some of you already have them in your programs. If you don't, please go ahead and fill out this information. Another thing we thought of is when, like the storm was happening, we're like, gosh, I wonder if anybody needs anything. And you're like, how do we contact anyone? We thought of the phone tree. You know, the phone trees, how people used to do it. Only everybody doesn't use their phone anymore. So if you look on the bottom, it'll say, how do you want to be reached? And so you can tell us, first call me, text me, and then call me on my phone or something like that. That's what I meant by primary, secondary contact. So you can write down how you want to be reached, and then we can have a phone tree, text tree, email tree. And if we need to send information out to everybody, we can get it. And if you're willing to be part of that tree, please circle here that I am willing to contact 3 to 5 members. And then we can make the old tree again, and we'll be able to send things out to people just like we did in the old days. So please, if you fill out one of these, if you need a form, raise your hand. I can get you in there, and we'll go ahead and, we'll get that done so that we'll know who everybody is, and we'll be able to contact each other again, okay? And these will be outside if you need it, okay? Thank you very much.
And as our final announcement, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker and worship leader, Reverend Mark Christian. Mark is a third-generation UU, now living and working in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Mark has served UU congregations in Las Cruces, New Mexico, as well as Oklahoma City, where he was born and raised. I first met Mark years ago when he was active at our Southwest UU summer camp, known as SWOOZY in those days, when it was held at Lake Texoma. And prior to Mark's work in ministry, he spent 20 years working in the radio business. Because of Mark's vision impairment, blindness, we're staging the service today from this vantage point to make it easier for movement and for Mark to engage more directly with you. Welcome to the All People's Church pulpit, Mark, and welcome to Fort Worth. We're happy to have you here. And now, please settle comfortably for our musical prelude.
This day is a gift of love, a gift from God, a gift from life itself. Come, let us worship together, for this is the day we have been given to live in, to love in, and in time to die in. Let us rejoice in our capacity to think, feel, hear, and understand. And let us rejoice in the promise and the possibility of this day. Now, as the chalice is being lit, I would like to share a song with you, and I'm going to teach it to you. It was written by a UU musician named Steve Finner, and I ran into him about 20 or 25 years ago, and I heard this in a piece at worship at General Assembly. And I said, I really like these. He said, you want to buy it? And I said, yeah. And I said, how much you want? He said, $75. And I said, okay, so you can use this any way you want to now. So I'm going to teach you one. It's 4 lines long. And what it says is, let there be light to drive away the darkness. Let there be wisdom to shine on the unknown. Let there be love to heal our aloneness. Let each of us be a light for one another. And it's very simple, so I'll sing one phrase at a time. Let there be light to drive away the darkness. Let there be light to drive away the darkness. Let there be wisdom to shine on the unknown. Let there be wisdom to shine on the unknown. Let there be love to heal our aloneness. Let there be love to heal our aloneness. Let each of us be a light for one another. Let each of us be a light for one another. Now let's try to do it all together. Let there be light to drive away the darkness. Let there be wisdom to shine on the unknown. Let there be love to heal our aloneness. Let each of us be a light for one another.
And now please stand in body or spirit for our opening hymn. Number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. And I think we all know this, Misha, so you won't need to play it through first. Enter, rejoice, and come in. And our spoken affirmation, love is the doctrine of this church, the quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. And we now invite the young and young at heart to come forward for our time for all ages.
How you guys doing today? Come on down. Come on down. Now, I'll let you know, I don't see very well. That's why I walk with a blind cane. So I'll try not to step on you all if you'll try not to trip over me, okay? Okay, I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories of all time. But I forget how it starts. See, how do stories usually start?
Once upon a time.
That's exactly how this one started. Once upon a time, there was an empire, a kingdom, a vast, vast area with a very powerful, ruler who insisted that he have the best of all things. Everything had to be perfect, better than anyone had ever imagined before.
So a tyrant.
Well, yeah, he was a tyrant, and I don't know if he was necessarily mean, but he was a bully, yeah. So anyway, he decided that he needed new clothes, and he put out the word that he needed to have the most magnificent set of clothing anyone had ever seen. And so everybody started scurrying around. Well, two guys who thought they were too smart, and they probably were too smart, said, we've got an idea. We'll just convince him we're giving him the best of everything, and we'll give him nothing. So they say, well, what we're going to need is we're going to need, 40 feet of your best gold chain. And we're going to need lots of silver and lots of beads and lots of pearls and lots of jewelry. And we're going to need velvet, and we're going to need all satin, and we're going to need silk, and we're going to make you a beautiful coat, a beautiful suit. And then you will be the wisest king ever. But the one thing you have to know about this suit is it's very special, because only people who are smart and wise can see it. If you're not wise and you're not smart, you can't see it. Well, nobody wanted to admit that they weren't wise and they weren't smart. So these guys start pulling in all the material. Of course, they're pocketing the jewels and they're pocketing the gold, and they're planning to go away. And they finally say, well, it's ready. And he says, now you got to remember that when we bring this out, only people who are smart can see it. So they come out, each holding one side of it, and they walk around and they say, isn't this magnificent? Look at that fine embroidery. Look at all that beautiful gold chain. Look at the beads, the diamonds, the pearls. And the emperor looks at it and goes, yes, indeed, it is magnificent. Never seen anything nearly so beautiful my entire life. Oh, well, that's good. So tomorrow you'll wear it out in the parade. He said, yes. And of course, all the people around him were going, oh, it is absolutely glorious. Did you see the way all those jewels work together? The way they sparkle, the way that the gold is reflected off the silver. And oh my, was that platinum in there somewhere? But of course, he puts on this, they get him in there to dress him, and they put nothing on him. He's just wearing his underwear. And he goes wandering out, and everybody's going, oh, that is magnificent. Look at that. How great that is. It's beautiful. And then somebody about your size looks up and says, I don't see anything. He's naked. And then everybody goes, oh my gosh, he is naked. And those two guys had to leave everything behind and run and run. So the emperor's new clothes were nothing. But what was special and was magnificent, what was best of all, was that one person's voice who was able to stand up when everybody else was saying the other thing and say, he's naked. He's just wearing his underwear. And I would end this story, but I don't remember how stories end. The end? Well, that's one way. Happily ever after, but I'm not sure the two guys who tried to steal stuff lived happily ever after, but everybody else did. And that's our story for today. Yeah.
Think about it from time to time.
We'll now sing the children. As we leave this friend. Let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place, which is sacred to so many of us, a community of memory and hope, for we are now the keepers of the dream. We share our undesignated cash offerings in the collection plate with a charitable group in the community. Our Share the Plate recipient this month is the Center for Transforming Lives, who are affiliated with the YWCA. They are an organization that works side by side with women and their children to disrupt the cycle of poverty throughout Tarrant County. The offering will now be gratefully received. Will the ushers please come forward? Mark has selected a reading today. It's from our hymnal, number 531, The Oversoul, by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I will lead us in this responsive reading. The words will be projected on the screen, or you can follow along in your hymnal. Let us learn the revelation of all nature and thought, that the highest dwells within us, that the sources of nature are in our own minds. I am constrained every moment to acknowledge a higher origin for events than the will I call mine. Every moment when the individual feels invaded by it is memorable. The soul's health consists in the fullness of its reception. Within us is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. And I now invite you to stand for our hymn, number 1051, Be Ours a Religion, in the teal hymnal. We don't have words to project for this hymn today, so I ask that you follow along in the blue hymnal. And Misha, would you please play it through before we sing to familiarize ourselves with the tune? 1058. Did I say something else? Sorry. At this time in our service, we pause to honor and to give time and attention to those things that are most important to us. We gather here for healing and for peace in our hearts and in the world, and honor our time together with the shared stories and news from the congregation. Each week there is a journal outside the entrance to the sanctuary where you can write a message of memory and hope. Also, at any time during our service, you're welcome to come forward and light a candle in our meditation center, which is here at the side of the chancel. Today we have several things from our Book of Memory and Hope. Please keep Emily Staples, who is the librarian at Elkins Elementary, in your thoughts as she travels to Houston to plan her attack on her recently discovered cancer. This is her latest occurrence, as she has been diagnosed 3 times prior. So we send our thoughts and prayers to Emily and her family. Michael Zepeda asks that you remember the family and friends of Wayne Nilsson, who lost his battle with cancer on Friday afternoon. Today is the 214th anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln, who, by the way, was familiar with the writings of the great Unitarian minister Theodore Parker and was influenced by his views on abolition. And finally, please lift up the historic first 2 black quarterbacks in the Super Bowl history. to play each other. The first woman on a coaching staff for a Super Bowl, and the first all-woman pilots for a Super Bowl flyover. We're making progress. Let us also include in our circle of concern those beyond our immediate community. Let us open our minds and hearts to the place of quiet, to the silent prayer for the healing of pain, and the soft, gentle coming of love. Please now settle comfortably and pause for a few moments of quiet meditation to hold and uplift the sorrows and the celebrations, both spoken and unspoken among us. And then Misha will lift our hearts with music.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here. I was just sitting here reflecting. I think that the last time I was in the facility, your minister was Marjorie Montgomery. Yeah, I go back a ways in this area, so this is a sermon that I call the Church of the Orthodox Heretic, because that's what I think we are. We are Orthodox heretics, and of course those are oxymoronic terms. Yes, we are oxymoronic often. Well, this sermon starts in a mythical kingdom, perhaps the same one I told the kids about earlier. And there is a big meeting going on in there, and the king and his court are there. And suddenly outside the gates, outside the building, outside the castle, there is a loud noise. There's lots of yelling and screaming, crying. And the king stops and says, "What is going on out there? Who is disturbing my peace?" And he instructs one of his leading ministers to go out. And the man departs and goes out for a while, comes back in, and the king says, "Well, tell me what it is. What's going on?" He says, "It's the Unitarians, sire. They are revolting." He said, "I know they're revolting, but tell me what's going on in the city square." We spend an inordinately amount of our time and energy trying to figure out who we are. And we are revolting in that sense. And I capture that in those two words, Orthodox and heretic, that you've got to have a basic understanding of. Orthodox says there is one right belief. Orthodox, right belief. And the heresy is a word that descends from the Greek and the Latin and means I choose. So you contrast those two things, I choose and right belief. And we usually come down on the I choose part, but we merge over time. And this has always been our way. Now you can trace back the beginnings of small u Unitarian and small u Universalist way, way back in philosophical history. But I want to start at the time of the Protestant Reformation. Prior to that point in time, there was just the church, which now we call the Roman Catholic Church. But there was no need to call it the Roman Catholic Church because there was just the church. And of course, in about 1500 or so, Martin Luther sees things that he objects in the world of the way the church is running, most importantly, the sale of indulgences. Because that was a matter of the church saying, what you do for the church will save you from hell. Not only that, it'll save your brother or your mother or your grandfather or whomever it is, because it's the church that bestows this favor. And Luther said, no, it isn't the church. It is God. And that carries on with the Calvinists in Geneva. So Germany and Geneva, the Calvinists and the Lutherans emerge. But there is a third strand of the Protestant Reformation, of which we are a part. It's called the Radical Reformation. And now the distinction for most of these things, and it was true of the Universalists and Unitarians of that time, is that the Radical Reformation was really about the question of baptism. You see, in Catholicism and in Lutheranism, you baptize infants to save them. These radical reformationists, of whom we are part, say, no, it has to be a believer's baptism. You have to know it. You have to choose it. You have to be it. Now, you see, Luther said that we were saved by faith alone. Our faith saves us by God, not the church. And the Universalists and the Unitarians of that time, they said the same thing. It is a direct relationship with God that saves us. And so they became this radical Reformation, most distinguished by their choice of baptism, which was very heretical, very against the core of what was being believed by most of the other churches. Beginning to sound a little normal to us, yeah. So anyway, we kind of struggle with it, and they go through conflict, and most of us are familiar with the stories of Transylvania, how as the times changed, the church was driven underground, and so the anti-Trinitarians of the area were forced to leave. Some of them went to Spain, some of them went to Holland, but they had to leave. Some of the Transcendentalists, not the Transcendentalists, the Unitarians in that area, of course, went underground in Transylvania, who later to emerge in the 19th century, and us recognizing cousins we didn't know we had. So the world shifts along like that, where we are kind of a group of heretics, but well within the Christian focus. And in the late 16th century, there is a Dutch Reformed theologian who comes along, Jacob Arminius, Arminianism, which states at its very basic that human beings have in their inherent capacity the ability to recognize and respond to God directly. Now, that doesn't sound too radical to us because we've been doing this for a while. But what that really means is saying that the human beings have within our inherent capacity the ability to recognize and respond to God is you don't need the salvific gift of Christ. Nothing had to be done to make you able to understand God and respond to God. It was in here already. You didn't have to have the Son of God come down, be crucified and raised to teach us the way. We know it. It's in us already. Well, that was pretty radical. That was the heresy. And that heresy persisted for quite a while, for a couple of 100 years. And it slowly began to evolve, and this is where we land in New England. The voices come across from England and other parts of Europe. They come to New England mostly and become the Unitarians and then later the Universalists. Again, believing that there's this individual relationship that was the core of the separation of the Protestant Reformation. And there's this Arminian understanding that says we have the capacity inherently to be religious, inherently to know God's will, and to not that we always do God's will for God's sake, but we have the capacity to do it. And that moves along smoothly, and this becomes the liberal Christians of the 18th and 19th century. And this begins to hit in Boston in particular, because at Harvard, now there was a liberal who was the head of the Hollis Professorship of Religion at Harvard, which is where all the churches in New England got their ministers. They all went to Harvard. But he was one of these Arminians. Didn't believe that you had to have a salvific act to be saved. That it was within you already. You just had to bring it out. Well, that's radical enough. And they settle in, and then something happens. Somewhere in the early 1800s, Ralph Waldo Emerson takes a walk in the woods, and we are never quite the same. Emerson goes into the woods and says that you can learn as much of God in an afternoon of walking in the woods as you can in a lifetime of Bible study. Well, that's radical. That's really radical. Not only do we not need the salvific act of Christ, we don't even have to have the Bible. It's in us. We can find it in nature. It resonates with us. He says the oversoul, we can perceive that reality, that there is no separation between us and that which is ultimate and that which is enduring. Well, that does not go well, even among the liberal Christians. You see, they were pretty well settled in where the heresy of one generation has become the orthodoxy of another. And that's how it always goes. Whatever was radical becomes normal. But nothing stays normal for long, because some other radical is going to come along and it'll become normal, and some other radical comes along and it'll become normal, and this happens over and over. So first we start out with separating from the church by saying it's an individual effort. It's about us individually. It's about our faith, our belief, our actions lead to our salvation. Then Emerson says that it isn't about anything in the Bible. It's out there for real. They add on to that with the Transcendentalists, because the Transcendentalists so slowly morph into a situation along with the Universalists of the time, saying that there is not just truth in the Bible, not just truth in separation from the Catholic Church, not just truth in a walk in the woods, but maybe these other religions, because by 1893 at the World Parliament of Religions, Jenkin Lloyd Jones has brought in Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists to talk about it. And they say maybe these other traditions have truths. Maybe they have answers for us. Maybe they have the questions we need to be asking. So we become this kind of world religion, individualism, and that becomes its own orthodoxy among us. And that becomes settled and normative. until something else comes along. And in the early 1900s, there are a few more Unitarians than Universalists, but they begin to question whether we really need God in the equation at all. Not that we don't need God, but the question is, shouldn't we be saying who and what human beings are before we can speculate about who and what God is? And what evolves is humanism. And in the 1930s, the Humanist Manifesto is written, signed by, I think, 17 Unitarians and 1 Universalist and 1 rabbi. It's our deal, folks, the Humanist Manifesto. And that becomes normative. It becomes its own orthodoxy. And I would even tell you that as that processes along through the 1950s, the 1960s, into the 1970s, it becomes a harsh kind of orthodoxy. Because many of our congregations got to the point where did you know, the minister said, did you know you mentioned God 6 times today? It wasn't good, That was the orthodoxy, the humanist orthodoxy that had set in place. We see it in our hymnal. Any of you have been around long enough to see the blue hymnal? Do you remember the blue hymnal? Not the teal hymnal, but the big blue hymnal that came out in 1961 at the time of merger. It is a humanist document. Kenneth Patton is one of the major writers in there, and he was a brilliant man. A Unitarian serving a Universalist congregation well before the merger. But all of it was about man. God, man, he, him, his, he, him, his, him, he, him, his. Well, as you might expect, there was a certain grouping in our congregations who began to get tired of all this he, him, and his. And I don't know how it was in Fort Worth, but in Oklahoma City and several other places I know, the very first places that the National Organization of Women met was in Unitarian churches. Feminism hit us big time. And we had this blue hymnal that had come out in, I think, 61 or 63, I don't recall which right now. But it was full of he, him, his. And suddenly these people are saying, we're not going to say that anymore. We're not going to say he when we say God. We're not going to say him when we mean humanity. We're not going to say mankind. We're going to talk about people. We're going to talk about humanity. We're going to talk about religion writ large. And so then we came out. Does anyone remember the little green hymnals? This was a hymnal that started out, I think, with 37 hymns that had been fixed, degendered. And in the back of it was also a list of a number of hymns from the blue hymnal that had no gender problems. So we went from having a big, thick blue hymnal to having 36 hymns because we agreed with them. Of course, that's why they say Unitarians don't sing very well, is because we're always reading ahead to make sure we agree with the words. I had a friend in Oklahoma City who was Attorney General and later on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals and then president of a university. He said, it was a good friend, he said, yeah, I can just hear you all. He'd say, onward, as to, making sure we agree with it. So feminism arises. And out of feminism, when you start not talking about God, you start talking and thinking about goddess. We start embracing the forms of the divine that were not specifically male as an outgrowth of that feminist that has arisen in our midst. Again, this is a heresy forcing an orthodoxy. Some of you were probably around in our congregations when paganism was on the rise, and the reception it got in a lot of our places. It's still not very comfortable in some of our congregations, but it was particularly not so then. But one of those goddesses that they talked about, and this is another transition, another orthodoxy become heretic, another heresy become orthodoxy, one of those goddesses was named Gaia, the goddess Earth, which then opened us to a kind of environmentalism, that we find a true religious, spiritual core to it that feeds us. And that didn't go smoothly in all of our congregations either. I was in a congregation that I grew up in Oklahoma City leading it when we went through the Green Sanctuary process. And there was a lot of fight over what rounds we could stand before people in terms of environmentalism and be true to ourselves. Orthodoxy being challenged by heresy. So that goes on. And of course, that's where we stop, right? You know, we've had our last orthodoxy to be challenged by heresies, right? We've decided it's an individual process. We've decided that it's inherently in us. We've decided it's not just about the Bible. We can walk in the woods. We've decided we can do more than that. We can study world religions. We can look in literature. We can look wherever we want to. It's a question of human beings, not above the divine. It's women over men. It's goddess. And now we stop. No. I will be honest, this is my traveling sermon. And I've done this sermon a number of times. And I was afterwards talking to somebody who said, well, what do you think our next challenge is? And I kind of view these as stratifications. It's like each one of these is a wave, and when it passes over it, it leaves its sediment, and another one comes and leaves its sediment, so it builds up the land that we stand on. And I said, I don't know, what do you think it is? And he answered very well, and I think it's true. He said, well, not the end of it, but the next one is probably going to be a question of virtual. And it's something we see right now. A lot of our congregations are fighting on how much to rely on Zoom, how much to rely on virtual pieces, how much can be done. And if you're like me and been around for a while, I understand virtual, but it doesn't feel authentic to me because that's not how I was raised. To my son, who's 35, it's perfectly normal, but not to me. So there's a generational shift, there's an orthodoxy, there's a heresy fighting. But that's not all of it either. That's not the end of it. Right now, if you follow the UU World or some of the other periodicals, or maybe you've had conversations around All People's Church here, you know about the Article 2 conversations that are going on. That we're looking at rewriting what our focus is, the focus that put forth the principles and purposes and the sources, saying that maybe those don't fit us anymore. And they are expanding them. The Canadian Unitarian Conference has already adopted an extra principle which cites beloved community and cites anti-racism as their cores. And this is a tension as well. And it's not playing out well in some of our places. And even where it's playing out well, it still is a trouble in some of our hearts. And what I'm telling you today, folks, is that we are a living tradition. We get these layers, these stratums that build up from all of our histories, and we stand upon them. And as each new wave comes, as each new heresy, if you wish to call it that, as new orthodoxies come and be challenged, we can drill down. We can drill down and we can reach that point where we know that God is inherently available to us. We can drill down where we understand it is an individual question. We can drill down and say nature is a source of us, like the Transcendentalists did. We can drill down and see the question of human beings and who and what human beings are is our central question. We can say it's not just man, it's women, it's everything. These are all the stratums we can draw on. That these orthodoxies coming out of heresies, being challenged again, are who we are. They are the land we stand upon. And we have the ability to draw down into them for strength when we need it. Because the thing I'm going to tell you is that every generation is going to have its challenges. There's much in the world. There are religious traditions who pretend that they are doing it exactly the same way they did it back in Jesus' day. That's not true. We can't even do it back in the way it was done in Marjorie Montgomery's day here. And that's good. You mentioned Theodore Parker a moment. He talked about the transient and the permanent in religion. He said that there's no reason to believe that the truths of Christianity depend upon the person and personality of Jesus any more than the truths of geometry are dependent upon the person and personality of Euclid or Archimedes. That which is true is true. And it's for us to discern it. It's for us to take it into ourselves, to internalize it, to live into it and live out of it. And my friends, that's why we come to church. We come together to share. to share what we have found, to say there's always a new way for us. And to be a little cautious as when we bring youth in every time, because you never know what's going to come out of the mouths of a babe. Why, he's naked. Perhaps I am. Amen.
Please now stand and join in singing our closing hymn, number 114, Forward Through the Ages. Never has it been more true than now. We extinguish this flame, but the sparks within us remain alight. From each of us in our supposed solitude, the signals buzz and hum, sparkling through space one to another, connecting us invisibly but palpably. We are one, and from every window our light shines.
My mentors in ministry, John Wolfe, from All Souls Unitarian in Tulsa, told me the benediction must always be a blessing. For he says, the odds are they will not be blessed other than here. So may your coming together be a blessing. May you take this blessing in the world and share it in a world which needs all the blessing we can give it. Amen.
Okay.